Coming up on this episode of Crime Family.
She recalls OJ's defense attorney, Johnny Cochran, leaning over and saying to her and her family, "Gotcha," which is wild.
Oh my God. That's crazy.
And you'd think he would have some type of sympathy. Like, if he wasn't the killer, you'd think he'd have some type of sympathy to the families who just lost Nicole and Ron. But he never really showed that type of sympathy for them. So it's just really sad. I mean, at least he was. It's just wild to me that he can be found not guilty in a criminal trial, but then in the civil trial, it's so clear.
If he did do it, I don't think he did it alone.
His evidence is all over the crime scene, and the other person's is nowhere to be found.
Yeah, and like, what was he dumping secretly at the airport in the garbage? Like, why did he need to do that?
You could have DNA and still get away with murder. Wow.
Yeah, so it's crazy.
Really crazy.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Crime Family. I'm Katie and I'm here with Steph and AJ. And we are now on to part 4 of our OJ case. And so if you're just tuning in, make sure you go back and listen to the first 3 episodes because they will provide you with the background, some of the evidence and details of OJ's trial for the murder of Nicole and Ron. And now we're going to get into the verdict and kind of just some of the aftermath of the O.J. Simpson trial.
All right. So here we are after a few hours talking about this case. It all comes down to the verdict. And obviously, if you're familiar with this case or, familiar with O.J. himself, you probably know what the verdict is. So we're going to just briefly talk about that verdict and then kind of go into the aftermath of it. The 11-month trial finally came to a close in early October of 1995 after, 11 months of testimony and witnesses and evidence, and it was just a crazy time. And it had been, almost a year and a half since the murders at this time. And after the jury left to deliberate, they actually end up reaching their verdict after less than 4 hours of deliberation. So just think all that, year and a half of effort putting this trial together and doing the trial, and then have it all come down to a less than 4 hour decision. And so, everyone comes back to the courtroom the next day, and the verdict is read live on television, just like everything else in this case. And OJ was found not guilty of the murders of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. And so he's been officially acquitted of both murders. I'll play like a clip from the reading of that verdict now.
All right, Mr. Simpson, would you please stand and face the jury? Mrs. Robertson.
Superior Court of California, County of Los Angeles, in the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA097211. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson, a human being, as charged in count 1 of the information. Superior Court of the State of California, County of Los Angeles, in the matter of the people of the State of California versus Orenthal James Simpson. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Ronald Lyle Goldman, a human being, as charged in count 2 of the information.
I was actually listening to an interview that Ron Goldman's sister Kim did in the years since, and she was actually on the Howard Stern show in 2019, and she was talking about being in the courtroom in the moment that the verdict was read. And right after it was read, obviously they're devastated and obviously not the outcome they wanted. she recalls OJ's defense attorney, Johnny Cochran, leaning over and saying to her and her family, "Gotcha," which is wild to say that to people who just found out this verdict that obviously they didn't want, and the death of her brother was still very much, fresh, a year and a half, and having to go through this trial and watch it all play out was crazy. So for like that callousness that he would show and that cruelty is pretty wild that he would say that. And after the verdict, you can really see the divisiveness in this case. So by and large, a lot of white people thought that OJ was guilty, and a lot of people in the Black community thought that he was innocent. And, suddenly OJ relied on the Black community to exonerate and support him, which was a total 180 from before the murders, when OJ kind of transcended race and was widely accepted by white America. So remember early on I talked about how we're going to see that shift, and that's kind of what I was talking about, like how before it was like, the white Hollywood elite loved him, and now it was like they had turned against him, and the Black community that he never really embraced himself was now the one embracing him during the trial, and certainly after the trial as well. And so after, the verdicts, OJ's a free man and, was free to go, but things caught up to him again. And in 1997, he was actually in court again because the Goldman family had filed a civil suit for wrongful death, and obviously in the deaths of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown. And so he was now on trial again in this civil case, which, wasn't a criminal trial, so he wouldn't be going to jail or anything like that. It would be mostly like if he did lose that civil trial, he would be given like a monetary penalty where he would have to pay out a certain amount of money to the families. So this kind of garnered a lot of attention as well. And, some evidence that didn't come up in the criminal trial came out in this one. So like when I was talking before about the pair of Bruno Malley's shoes that he denied ever wearing, the picture that had come out since the criminal trial of him wearing those shoes, which was a size 12 and the same type of shoe with the boot print that was found at the crime scene. So they kind of showed that photo during the civil case, and, OJ seeing his reaction to him seeing this photo of him wearing the boots is quite interesting, because he probably didn't know that that photo existed, and certainly wasn't what he wanted to have be revealed during the civil trial. So too bad that that wasn't something that came out in the original trial, like this photo, but it's pretty damning evidence for sure, I would say. And then in the end, so after the civil trial, OJ was actually found liable for the deaths of Nicole and Ron, and he was ordered to pay $33.5 million to the victims' families. So to this day, it's, 26 years later, only a small fraction of that has actually been paid to the families. And shortly after this verdict, OJ relocated from California to Florida, because Florida is actually one of the few states where personal assets can't be used towards payments of judgments such as this one. So kind of, sly of him to go to Florida where he knows that they're not going to be able to take any of his personal assets to pay these debts. So it's just really sad. I mean, at least he was. It's just wild to me that he can be found not guilty in a criminal trial, but then in the civil trial, it's so clear and can be found guilty. So he was deemed guilty civilly in this case for their deaths, just not criminal.
Yeah, I find it crazy that he was not found guilty criminally, but then, yeah, civilly, like you said. And also, I didn't know that was such a thing, that certain states don't actually have to pay what the court says you have to pay. Like, that seems a bit crazy. So that's a new one for me as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in Florida you still have to pay it, but they just have different guidelines of like what can be used as assets. Like, they couldn't just sell off all his assets and pay that money to the families. It's like they can't touch his assets. And his, like, because he still gets a pension from the NFL from being in the league. So all of that money also can't be touched or used towards that as well.
So what can be then, like, money that you make if you got a new job, some of that maybe, or?
Yeah, like it's probably any like new income that he gets that's not his pension, or
okay, so just not stuff he already has.
Yeah, so basically he would have an incentive now to not do anything and not work for the rest of his life, because he knows that if he does, it's probably gonna have to, that money's gonna go to the families.
Oh my god, that's crazy.
And you'd think he would have some type of sympathy, like if he wasn't the killer, you'd think he'd have some type of sympathy to the families who just lost Nicole and Ron, but he never really showed that type of sympathy for them. Just kind of showed anger towards them, which is an odd reaction to have.
Yeah, and apparently at Nicole's funeral, he did kind of like kiss the coffin and say, "I'm sorry, Nick." That was reported, I think, by Kris Jenner, maybe, since, she was one of Nicole's best friends. So, but anyway.
Yeah, we didn't make mention of the Kardashians at all in this episode, but
Yeah, we almost went through the whole 4 episodes without mentioning one of them, so my bad. But anyway.
yeah, just because, I mean, if those you probably know, but their father, Robert Kardashian, was one of OJ's lawyers, defense lawyers, so. And I did mention him in one of the earlier parts too.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Okay. Okay, so yeah, I guess if you believe that OJ is innocent, because there are some people out there that believe that he is, then you kind of have to think about, well, then who actually did do it? And in the documentary called Is OJ Innocent, which we mentioned a couple times already, which is on Discovery Plus, it features former police sergeant Derek Levasseur and forensic psychologist Chris Mahondy, and they investigate private investigator Bill Deer's theory that maybe OJ's son, Jason, actually committed the murders. And apparently there was about 50 other persons of interest that were ruled out in this case. So a lot of people think that maybe the police had tunnel vision, they went straight to OJ, but they did consider at least 50 other people that maybe they didn't do a deep dive into, but they kind of considered them, found out they had an alibi, and then moved on. So it wasn't just OJ in the spotlight the entire time, even though he was the main one, obviously. And because Jason lawyered up very early, he refused to talk, and he had an apparent alibi, police actually never questioned him at all in this case.
Like Katie said, like, this documentary is kind of private detective Bill Deer's take on the whole O.J. Simpson case. And it kind of takes a deep dive back in time in the detectives that are looking into this case almost 30 years later. And they want to get to the bottom of, is O.J. innocent? They look at all the evidence and all the missed opportunities that may have been ignored by investigators. So this was the first documentary that I actually watched before I watched any of the other ones that we have mentioned. I should have watched the other ones first before I watched this one, but this one just caught my eye, so I might be a little bit, shouldn't say a little bit naive or anything, but I should have watched the other ones first, because this one kind of takes a whole different spin on who they might think actually did it.
I do find though, yeah, like the first one you watch, if it's a really well done one or you enjoy it, like you kind of like have more of a, not a bias, but like you're every other one kind of is like either going to prove what you feel about the first one or not. You know what I mean? Like if you come out of the first one thinking he's innocent or guilty, every other one has to kind of convince you otherwise.
It corrupts your judgment.
Yeah. Yes. That's a good way to say it.
Yeah, and I think it kind of did, because this documentary kind of like goes into like their theories on who else could have done it and kind of wanting to make OJ innocent. So the detectives talked to a lot of people who were present at the time during the murders, and they also asked like questions that the detectives at the time never asked. So when I was watching this documentary, I was like so interested in like how Bill Deer was. He was very adamant that OJ was innocent.
No, I kind of felt the same way when I was watching it too. It was like he was very much tunnel vision, that he thought that Jason had done this, and the other evidence that people were kind of presenting were things that went against what he thought. He was, he just kind of thought, well, that's bullshit, I don't believe that. So it kind of felt like, because he had looked into this for so long, that he didn't want to be proven wrong. So yeah, it kind of like he was kind of stretching some things to kind of make it look like something that it wasn't.
One of the main evidence that they were looking at was the timeline of Jason's whereabouts during the time of the murders. And this is something they focused on like throughout the whole entire documentary, about where he was in the timeline. So according to Jason, he was at the bar, or at the restaurant that he was working at. I guess that night his dad and them were supposed to show up. He took this shift because he could show them his skills, and he was supposed to show up, but they never did show up. And so according to him, he leaves and drops off his girlfriend. He kisses her goodbye, and then he goes home. So what the detectives were focusing on is like how long it took him from to leave work, drop off his girlfriend, and then go to his house. It was like around midnight, I believe. There wouldn't be much traffic, and they wouldn't, like, it could be possible. So they actually got in their cars on a Sunday night and did the actual route, it was very, very close, and it could be possible, but they also did it on a Sunday when there was no heavy traffic, so I don't know, I'll say I don't know LA, but 27-minute window seems awfully such a small window to get from one side of LA to the other and then back to your house.
I think they concluded that it just probably was not enough time for him to get off work, speed over there, and then have time to commit the murders. Like, I think that was the ultimate conclusion. It was very unlikely.
I think they say it took a little bit more than 27 minutes. So, yeah, I think they're pretty sure they concluded that it was impossible for him to get to point A to point B in that short amount of time. Also, one of the things that they really focused on was his timestamp that he had during the night of the murders. And what's very interesting about this is that normally you'd punch in, punch out, so you'd have like a time card. But his time card was written in, and to the detectives, it was very, very sketchy, because why would you write in your time card when you normally just punch in, punch out? They just honed in on this time card because it was just something that didn't really sit right with them. And they were trying to figure out, like, how he could, like, was he actually at work at the time he said it? And they did, like, they even went to, like, a handwriting expert and see if that was his handwriting. And they talked to the owners that worked with him that night. And, like, he said he was at work, but he, like written it in. And also to know, like, when he wrote in the date, it was, like, a couple days after his shift that night of the murders. They found out, so it wasn't even the same night. It was a few days after, which is also sketchy.
Yeah, so originally it looked like he had written in the time that he said that he left at 10:30 that night at work, but it was, like, handwritten, like Steph was saying. And why, out of nowhere, instead of punching in and punching out, would you have to write in your time for that night? When they do some investigating, though, they kind of realize that they think that they had the date wrong. Like, it looks like it was supposed to be for that night of the murders, but they figure out that it's actually a couple days after that he had written in, or a couple days before. So it turns out that that wasn't even for the right date that they were looking at. That's what they came up with in the end. And so that time card, it looked sketchy, but they had an explanation for it that kind of, so like, oh yeah, the night of the murders, he actually did punch out at the time that he said, and he punched in and out. That handwritten portion was for a different day.
Yeah, so all that effort going into the time card was kind of just, like, put to the side because it didn't really matter. But still, Bill Deere is still adamant that Jason had some part or whole part in the murders. He also mentions that there was a storage locker that Jason had that nobody looked into. He had a bunch of stuff in the storage locker. When Bill went to the storage locker, he got permission to search it. He found a knife in the storage locker. And he says that this could be the murder weapon. I mean, who knows? It might have been. But the fact that nobody searched the storage locker, it kind of makes sense because nobody actually questioned Jason. He wasn't looked at as a suspect, so there'd be no sense of anybody searching his storage locker. But Bill Deere is so adamant that Jason was part of this whole murder thing that he actually found what he thinks was the murder weapon. He sent it to forensic to get a look at it, and they found out that there was some blood on it, but they couldn't be for sure whose blood it was because it was a very tiny bit of blood. But after, it was like 30 years after, like who knows how long that knife's been in the storage locker. So there's just a lot of things that are not going Bill Deere's way, but he's like Katie said, he's so tunnel vision that OJ is innocent for some reason.
It's so weird that you would, like, convince yourself that OJ was innocent for so long when all the evidence that you're presenting is like very shaky, and you're discounting tons of evidence that's much more solid. So it's just weird that you would take that stance.
During the investigation, at the beginning, there was this wool cap that was found at the scene.
Yeah, they found hairs that were consistent with a black person, but they couldn't tell like who it actually belonged to.
So Bill Deer's theory is that, well, he presents that it's Jason's wool cap, because if you look at pictures of Jason in any of the pictures that Bill Deer presented, or if you look at any pictures of him and his family, like, he's wearing a wool cap.
Yeah, but wool caps are very generic. Like, tons of people have wool caps. Like, that's...
Yeah, it was like a black one that looked like exactly to the one they had found. And then after the murder, pictures of him, he had a different one on. So it made it look like, oh, he lost his hat that night. But they also brought up the argument that, well, maybe because he saw that there was a hat that looked just like his, he changed hats because he just didn't want to be associated with that. And people were saying, well, maybe OJ borrowed that hat or took that hat and wore it that night, so he needed to get a new hat. So I don't know. It just seems like it's very, very loose.
Oh, yeah. And I forgot, that they found the wool cap at the scene, too, because we were so focused on, like, the glove. But, yeah, there was that wool cap, which I just find it's such a stretch that they would, like, I don't know. It's like he's grasping at straws to, like, for some reason, try to paint this picture that OJ's so innocent. But nothing that I've heard Steph say or anything that I've seen on any other argument is convincing at all.
Yeah, and, like, they go into, well, maybe OJ isn't innocent, but he had an accomplice, and that accomplice was probably Jason, is also what Bill eventually comes down to, I think. It's like, well, Jason was definitely there with OJ, if OJ did it, so, yeah.
Because back when we talked about the shoe print at the scene, according to Bill Deer, there was actually 2 sets of footprints at the scene.
Yeah, so I did talk about this, and they have that, one of the experts, Dr. Henry Lee, which I've seen in other documentaries too, and somebody else says, well, yes, Dr. Henry Lee is very, like, he's very smart, he knows about these kinds of things, but he also does things for money, so if you pay him enough money, he'll kind of say what you want him to say. So that was kind of an accusation for one of the other experts that said, no, there actually is only 1 set of footprints. The other things that look like footprints are those other things that I talked about before. So I think their conclusion was that it likely is only 1 set of footprints at the scene.
So there's another theory of Bill's that just went out the window. So it's looking more and more like there's only 1 person at the scene. And I just found, like, I really liked this documentary, but I also found it was maybe too tunnel vision. I feel like they just kind of just pointed at that one, like, Jason, and he kind of just stuck with that.
I try to be very, like, it's so easy for a documentary to, like, be sensationalized, or, like, all they have to do is put a narration and, like, some creepy music over it, and it can really be convincing. So I feel like I always try to look, like, just go right to the evidence and, like, going over, like, what was found at the scene and, like, the blood and the DNA evidence and all that stuff, because it's, like, it's so hard you can't just watch one documentary and, like, be convinced that that's what happened. You have to consider, like, what's their reasoning behind this perspective, like, who created it, all that stuff. Like, you have to think of that. So I always try, even, like, the OJ Made in America one, like, you still, even though I found that one still did a very good job, like, presenting just, like, the facts, but so it's always hard to, like, watch a documentary, because a documentary can be good, like, well produced, but that doesn't mean that it's factual or, like, responsible. And it's the way that they do it, in a way, if that makes sense. So I always try to go back to, like, the crime scene and, like, what was presented at trial and all that stuff to, like, make a decision.
Yeah, that's why I think this documentary, if they didn't bring in Derek and Chris and they just kind of presented only what Bill Deer had to say, then yeah, you'd be like, oh, it does look like Jason could have done it. But then it's when Derek and Chris kind of go through stuff and reach out to other people and they have that other perspective where you're kind of like, oh, yeah, maybe it's likely that he didn't do it. So, I mean, it could have very easily have been twisted to look like Jason did it for sure. And that's what you got to be careful of, like you were saying, when you're watching these kinds of things, because it's very easy to twist things around if you don't include everything that's out there.
And with a case like this, it's very hard to include everything that's out there because there's so much. And unless you're doing like a 15-part series, you're never going to include everything. And most filmmakers or whatever, when they go into making a documentary, like there's a story they want to tell and they have to stick to that story. So there are things that do get cut out, but there's ways to be responsible still in doing that.
Yeah, and it's so easy to pick a side and just only present things that go with what you're trying to say. So yeah, you got to look out for that. And of course, any like responsible person's going to look at both sides and make a decision.
One of the things that Derek Levasseur and Chris Mahonde looked at was a witness that said she saw OJ's Bronco by Nicole's house, and it also looked like there was a person in the passenger seat as well.
Well, yeah, that was Jill, right? Because she was the one that sold her story to the tabloids.
Yes, but they talked to her in this documentary, and like she was the one that said she never did that. But she was convinced that there was 2 people in the Bronco that night that she saw the Bronco. But nothing was ever confirmed to link Jason being in the Bronco, and nothing confirms to link him to the murders. Because he was never questioned by the police, ever, and he lawyered up, there was no need to search his property. There was no need to search anything, so there's nothing there to link him to the murders. So it could be possible that he did it and had an accomplice, or that OJ did it and it was Jason who was his accomplice. But I don't think Jason did it. I also don't think OJ did it, but I think...
You don't?
I think he had somebody do it for him. I don't think he actually did it. But that's just my opinion. I don't know. I could be totally wrong.
There's no evidence of that.
Yeah, that's a hot take, I guess.
Yeah, there's zero evidence.
That's a hot take. There's zero evidence. I just think it's so clear. I mean,
I just think if someone else did it, there would have to be some like one piece of evidence that it wasn't OJ, and there is not.
Yeah, like all the evidence like points to OJ, and like of
but
course.
But if it was OJ, he would have been guilty. Like there's so much. If there's so much evidence pointing towards him, then why is he not? Like why did he not?
Well, we explained all the reason why he got off.
I know, but I'm just saying, like.
Yeah, but we know what happens all the time. Some people get convicted and they didn't do it, right? So it goes the other way as well. Just because you're acquitted doesn't mean you didn't do it.
No, but I just don't think he did. I don't think.
I know, but like, do you have like why?
Because I don't think he was there that night. I don't think he.
But, like why?
The timeline? You just don't think the timeline fits?
Yeah, I think I don't think the timeline lines up. And same with Jason's. Like I don't. It's impossible for him to get from point A to point B in 27 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Jason had anything to do with it at all. Like that
No.
was just something that one person brought up, and then they kind of ran with it. There's no evidence that Jason did anything, so I think we should just forget about him altogether.
Yeah,
Well, it's probably too late now. I think they just need to use DNA inside that glove, and then we'll find out who did it.
it'll be OJ. But I also think like I was watching a lot of like interviews with a lot of the people after the fact, and I watched another interview with Marcia Clark, and they asked her about, I don't think it's this documentary you guys are talking about, but there's another one that came out in like 2016 that is similar and trying to like paint this picture of Jason Simpson as being involved. And like her response to it was basically like, it was like a despicable documentary, like the way that they did it. And like, there's no evidence to suggest that Jason did it. And also she says that like, it's just a terrible position to put Jason in because like, what's he going to do? Defend himself by saying like, oh, it wasn't me, but it was my dad that did it. Like, obviously he's not going to say that. He can't defend himself by pointing the blame at OJ because that's his father. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I think to like harp on that argument or to like bring, like to consider that argument is just like, I don't even.
I just can't believe he was never ever interviewed. Like, you think that would be the first person besides OJ that they would interview? Like, I don't understand.
But also there's like no motive for Jason. Why would they? Like, there's no motive for him to do it. Like, why would he kill Nicole? Like,
well, he could like, he was mad that night because his family didn't show up to the dinner that they said they were going to.
No, there's no proof that he was mad. That's one of the theories they brought up that thought because, they were supposed to come to the restaurant and then they ended up not going. They're like, well, maybe he was super pissed about that and went over to kill Nicole because she didn't come out to eat. So, but there's no proof that he was angry about that. That's just something they brought up.
They also talk about, like, in this documentary, they also talk about, like, he wasn't always the best person either. Like, there was allegations of him being violent towards his girlfriend and stuff too, or
OJ wasn't a good person either.
True. Maybe they did it together. And neither of them are talking. I don't know. But they also brought up OJ wrote a book after all of this came out. It was called If I Did It. And in that book, he describes a character named Charlie who he says did it. But who's this Charlie person?
He wrote this book, and I think came out in 2006 or something, and it was like called If I Did It, and it was supposedly him like saying in a hypothetical situation, like saying I didn't do it, but like if I did it, then this is how it would have happened or how it would have gone down. And he talks about this alter ego named Charlie, like either convincing him to do it or being there when it happened. So it's kind of like saying that like Charlie is committing the crime. It's like he was like trying to admit to doing it, but like using this fake person Charlie, saying like, oh, Charlie did it and this is how they did it, so that he didn't have to like out front say that it was him that did it.
But why write the book though? Like when I heard about that, like I don't understand.
Make some money.
Yeah.
Well, true, but was he guilty? Like, did he have this guilty conscience that he needed to just not tell the truth publicly, but just write it in a book?
Well, he was probably broke and knew he needed a new gig because...
I doubt he was broke.
Well, no, I guess he has a pretty good pension. I'm sure he just needs a new gig. I don't know what he wanted, if he wanted attention. I read something that, like, the publishers had, like... He had, like, agreed to this book. It was written by, like, a ghostwriter. He agreed to the book to get the money from the publisher, but, like, didn't really know what it was. And then the publisher went in and, like, released the book or whatever. Like, he didn't write it. I don't know. It was just... I don't know.
It's not really relevant. Really, well,
I mean, it kind of is because he.
Well, it is, but like
it's like a confession almost.
It never went anywhere, though.
No, the book was banned. Like it stopped being published. Like that, it's not allowed to be out there in the world anymore.
I think there was controversy about the book initially, and then it wasn't going to come out. But then I think it was the Goldmans that were like against the book, obviously. But then like later they had agreed to let it come out. But then the agreement was like any money that was made off of it was going to be going to them as part of the settlement that they were owed. And also they like changed the title of the book. So like before it was like If I Did It, and it still was If I Did It, but like they put the word if like in really small letters. So like if you look at the cover, you can't even see the word if. It's just saying like I did it. And then they added like I did it, the confession of a killer or something. So they're trying to like make it seem, and they're like, this is the closest we're probably ever going to get to a confession. So we're going to like market it as that. And then they got the profit from what they were owed from the civil trial. Is what I read.
Okay. I think it was banned, though, eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it's in publication anymore, but...
No, I don't think so. But also there's reports of, like, OJ saying to someone, I forget who it was, he said, I couldn't have done this alone. So, like, why say that?
Well, I have no doubt if he did it, he didn't do it alone. It's very hard to kill two people at once.
Not really. I mean, he's a huge man and she's...
True. And I'm not saying he did it, but I'm just saying.
But the thought is that they weren't both together at the same time. It's not like he went up and attacked two people at once. It was Nicole was by herself. He killed her, and then Ron just happened to come and stumble upon the scene. And so Nicole was already dead, and then he just had to overtake Ron. So it wasn't like attacking two alive people. It was one after the other. So it would have been easier, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Or and at the very least, Ron came while he was already stabbing and attacking Nicole, which she can't do much at that point.
Yeah. So it wasn't like it was 2 against 1. It was really 1 against 1 each time.
And also this is like OJ. So like there was no evidence of breaking and entering. So like Nicole knew him. So like if she saw him, it'd be very easy for him to like walk up to her and she's, you know what I mean? Like all he has to do is walk up to her and like stab her once and then she's down, right? Like it's not that hard. It's not like she would see like an intruder and like run the other way. You know what I mean? Even though she should have ran from OJ, or maybe she would have.
But she was also scared of him too, though, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Back when they were married.
Yeah, but it's very different than like seeing an intruder and then running away.
Yeah, see, I don't know though, because I guess going back to the timeline, it just doesn't add up. It doesn't make any sense. But then you talk about the duffel bag that he took out and put stuff in the trash, like. That's kind of iffy. He wouldn't let anybody touch it, but I don't know. I just don't think he did it. I don't think the timeline doesn't fit, and I don't.
But I think the timeline, like he went to McDonald's, got back to McDonald's at 9:36, and comes out of his house at 11:15. That's like an hour and a half, and the houses weren't that far apart from each other. So, and no one knows where he was in that hour and a half.
I'm just surprised there was no like surveillance cameras. It's a very uppity neighborhood. You'd think that someone would see something.
Yeah, but the limo driver didn't see him till 11 or 10:55. So that's even more time.
Yeah. Well, the limo driver saw him at 10:55, and Cato saw him at 9:36, like when they came back from McDonald's.
And the limo driver said he knocked on the door and like a couple times.
Yeah, there's nobody there. He was like buzzing. He couldn't get in because the gate was closed. He was like buzzing and waited. There was no lights on. And then finally he sees like OJ appear going into his house.
Well, he couldn't confirm it was OJ, technically, but just sus.
But who would have been then? It would have been...
No, but somebody walked into OJ's house and turned all the lights on, and then OJ comes out. So
Yeah.
who else?
Would it be Cato?
No, though.
Because he lived on the property.
Well,
He wouldn't hear the...
No, but he lived in like a back bungalow thing.
he probably wouldn't have had a key to the house either.
Yeah, I don't think he would.
True. So he saw OJ coming into the house?
Yeah.
Yeah. The house was all dark, and then that limo driver had his headlights like flash towards the entrance to OJ's house because he was waiting for him. And then all of a sudden he just sees like this figure walk into the entrance of OJ's house, and that's when OJ's lights turn on in the house, and that's when OJ goes over the buzzer and say, "Oh, I slept in. I'll be ready soon." So, like, what the hell?
Look, obviously that person's OJ. Like, who else is it? It's not an intruder breaking in. Somebody's coming in and into the house.
Yeah, nobody ever came forward to be like, "Oh, that was me that walked into OJ's house." Like, I think Cato would have been like, "Oh, that was me," right? But nobody ever said, "Oh, I went and woke OJ up."
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody ever said that, and so nobody else was there.
Yeah, like you'd think the minute that the limo driver said, "Oh, I saw somebody go into the house," Cato would have been like, "That was me," if it was.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's gonna hold that back. So
Yeah, and no one ever did, so it had to have been OJ coming from some direction around the house, around the time that Cato says he heard the thumps on the wall, which were where.
yeah, he jumped over the fence, right?
Yeah,
Bumped into the bungalow and then went into his driveway.
yeah.
That doesn't mean
Because Cato says he heard. Well, Cato says he heard the bumps. Well, I mean, but that's way more of a compelling argument than anything to do with Jason or any other argument.
Well, maybe he was out for a jog. Forgot his keys.
No, but he walked into his own house with his keys.
So why does he come around the back then? Why wouldn't he just go to the front gate?
Why did he have to jump over his own fence?
Like, why did he come in? He probably maybe saw the limo driver parked there, didn't want to go in the front because that's more obvious of like the limo driver's going to see me coming in. Like, you know what I mean?
But did the limo driver see his Bronco? He didn't see his Bronco
Well,
when he pulled up to the house. And there was no other cars there, according to the limo driver. There was no other cars on the street where he parked.
I know. So that says OJ wasn't there when the limo driver got there. If his Bronco's not there.
I don't know. I just don't think.
But maybe he did. I mean, it's a huge estate, so it's not like the limo driver at one gate is necessarily going to see if the car is parked at another gate somewhere or near another gate. Like, it's a huge property. You're not necessarily going to see that.
Right, because the Bronco was on his property when the police went to go check on OJ that same night or early the next morning, right? So it was there somewhere eventually.
Yeah, it was there, but I know when they interviewed Mark Furman in that, he was saying that like there was like the main gate where like the limo driver would have been, and then the other officer stayed there. He walked a little bit down to the other gate, and that's where he saw the Bronco. I don't know if it was parked inside the property or just like, I'm assuming it probably would have been inside the property, but at like another gate or like parked on the side of the road. Maybe parked on the side of the road. I'm missing that detail. I don't know for sure, but the point is he saw the Bronco there at whatever time that was, 6 a.m. But
Yeah, like the limo driver didn't see the Bronco pull in, but yeah, like you said, it could have came in from a different way because it was around that area anyway when the police were searching it.
yeah. And so it's like a huge property, so he could have drove the Bronco to the house, but the limo driver's not necessarily going to see him do that. If he's at one gate, if he goes to like another back gate or a gate that's like not close to that, he can still drive the Bronco home without the limo driver seeing him.
Yeah, because he obviously didn't want the limo driver to know that he was out somewhere, right? Because he said he was sleeping.
Yeah. And then the limo driver just happened to see him walking into the house anyway, but he didn't plan that.
Yeah, so
the defense did a good job of completely destroying Mark Furman's character, and he's the one who found the glove. So then they're like, okay, well, if he is truly a racist and he's a crooked cop, like, can we really, you know, it left room for doubt of like, well, did he really find the glove? And then they tried to cast doubt on like everyone who was collecting the blood evidence, and then basically just trying to paint that image. So, and then the jury, like, it loved OJ. So,
Yeah, I mean, what gets it for me is like there was literally OJ's blood drops on the walkway at the scene of the murder. So, why else would they be there? His blood, right? So, that alone is almost enough for me.
yeah.
Oh no, you're not gonna convince me. I just don't.
You love OJ?
You love OJ, I guess. I don't know.
No, I don't really know the person.
Well, I mean, I'm
but-
just obviously, but I'm just fascinated because you're the only person I've ever heard who said that he didn't.
The only person ever. There are some other people.
Well, I mean, like, yeah, but I mean, like, I've never heard anyone.
I'm not saying he's completely innocent though. I'm not saying like he didn't do it and that's that and that. But I don't think he. I just don't think he did it. I think
It's just weird that like you accept more easily like all the stuff to do with like Jason than you accept the blood, DNA evidence, and all that stuff.
Do you buy in that the police planted evidence against OJ?
no.
Oh, okay. How do you explain the evidence then?
Well, like I mean, the sock, yes, because is like I believe they planted that because that's proven that it wasn't in the photograph. But then all of a sudden it appears.
Yeah, but then it comes out to say that that video that was taken was actually after they picked up the sock, and then they did like a sweep of the house after they picked stuff up. So I don't know. The timelines are all weird. Nobody really knows.
But I mean, there's gonna be DNA in Nicole's house anyways because he lived there. Did he not?
Well, not for like a long time before the murders.
The DNA would still stay there though. Like if you lived in that house for a long period of time, like you'd.
Yeah, but his blood's not going to be there
Well, no, but like.
on the walkway.
Yeah, why would you have fresh blood everywhere? Because you lived there 4 years ago. Like,
Well, I mean, I was just like going back to what you said. Like you said, so you didn't believe the evidence was planted. So if you don't believe the evidence was planted by the LAPD, then you have to believe that the evidence is there legitimately, which means it points to OJ. You know what I mean?
I didn't say I didn't believe it was all planted. I said I believed some of it was planted. Some of it wasn't.
Well, no, Katie said, do you believe it was the evidence was planted? And you said no. Like the blood in the Bronco or on the Bronco, do you think that was planted? Do you think the glove was planted?
Well, the blood in the Bronco to me is like, okay, whatever. Like that's his car. He could have cut his finger like 100 times in that car because he had it.
Fresh blood?
I don't know. Wasn't fresh blood.
yeah, I don't think they really have any proof of like when that blood was there. It could have been there from before.
Like he's had that Bronco for God knows how long. It could have been like years. I don't know. Who knows?
I don't know. They can tell if there's degraded blood and fresh, relatively fresh. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, and if it's like OJ's not going to leave blood on the handle of his car for a year. Like if it was from a year ago, it's not going to be there now.
Yeah, I mean he probably gets his cars washed.
Well, if he cut his finger and not noticed it, and then like it bled randomly.
No, but Mark Furman said he noticed it like on the handle the night he went there. It had to be noticeable enough to notice it from just walking up to it.
I guess, but
It's not like they they swabbed it everywhere and found it like underneath the handle, like, you know, it was like on the handle very noticeably.
Yeah, and like what was he dumping secretly at the airport in the garbage? Like, why did he need to do that? Explain that.
And he also wouldn't let anyone touch the bag.
well, I can't because I don't know why he would do that. But I'm gonna just say this: I don't think if he did do it, I don't think he did it alone.
Where's the evidence?
But it's just all his evidence is all over the crime scene and the other person's is nowhere to be found.
It's just one of those. I don't know. I don't know. After watching everything, I just don't.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, you're entitled to your opinion, but from what I know and what most of the world, there's just no evidence to suggest that anyone else did it other than him.
Yeah, I just think, like, I haven't yet to hear. I mean, if this is like
I'm just gonna keep going back to the timeline because it doesn't fit, and
but I think it does. But
if the timeline doesn't fit, then
You must have quit.
it's like, if this is like happens to be like a cold case where the serial killer's still out there, it's like, I'm all ears. I want to know who did these murders, obviously. But like, it's also funny that OJ himself has never once said, I'm going to find out who did this. If he really loved Nicole, like, he's never put any effort into finding the real killer.
Are they still investigating it? Like, are they still looking into it?
Well, it's still considered an open case, isn't it? Because
Well, I guess, technically.
because they don't have anyone arrested for it. So yeah.
They didn't find anybody, so maybe it'll be like that Natalie Holloway case. Maybe like
Yeah, I mean,
20 more years down the road, well, he'll probably be dead by then. But he'll write a confession note before he dies or something.
Yeah.
no, I feel like he loves it that he got away with it, and he's never gonna say anything about it.
So, I mean, obviously, these are all just our opinions, just allegedly, all of this stuff. And he was found not guilty. So, I mean,
Well, this goes to show, like, evidence doesn't matter,
Yeah,
apparently.
in certain cases, I guess.
You could have DNA and still get away with murder. Somehow.
yeah, that's like the whole thing about why that Rodney King thing was like so significant. I think everything kind of led up to why he got acquitted, and that was a big part of it.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to like mention that, because it's like puts into context of like how you can have all this evidence and still get off. He did end up going to jail, just not for this.
Yeah, so I do have a little bit about that. So after he was acquitted in 1995 of the murders, he was actually arrested for armed robbery and kidnapping in Las Vegas. So in September of 2007, he actually attacked two men in a Las Vegas hotel room to try and get back some sports memorabilia that he claimed was stolen from his home in 1995. So this exactly 13 years after he was acquitted for the murders, he was found guilty of this crime, and he was sentenced to 33 years in prison with a 9-year minimum. And 9 years later, he was actually granted parole in July of 2017. And so he was released a few months after that in October of 2017. So yeah, he's out of jail.
I didn't realize it was 30, like he was sentenced for 33 years. But only served 9.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know he went to jail, I just couldn't remember what it was for, but I didn't realize it was, like, could have been 33 years.
Yeah. And he only served 9 of those years. And it's just crazy, too, that you said exactly 13 years after he was acquitted. Like, he was acquitted for the murders on October 3rd of 95, and then he got sentenced for these crimes in Las Vegas on October 3rd, 2008, which is crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy that it was exactly 13 years.
Yeah. And then, yeah, he got off after 9 years, went on parole, and now he's living the high life, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what he's doing now. He has a Twitter account and goes off about stuff. I don't know.
He did like this weird show called The Juice or something. I forget, they showed clips of it in this one documentary I was watching, and it was just like super tacky and trashy, and he would like do pranks or something to people, and then he'd go up to them and be like, "Oh, do you recognize me? Do you know who I am? I'm OJ." It was really weird. It was like his attempt to like get money again or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, any money he gets is probably going to go to the victims, which I hope it does, but I don't know really what he's doing. I obviously don't follow him on any social media and never will. But yeah, these are just my opinions, obviously.
Steph probably follows him. No, sure.
Your biggest fan over here, I guess.
Yeah.
You should buy his memorabilia. I don't know.
No, I do not follow him.
No, just kidding.
Yeah, I have his picture above my bed. I do not.
Gross. Yeah, I don't know what he's doing either. I have no idea. Don't care.
Yeah. He's living his life or whatever. But anyway, so it's just crazy that he got acquitted of these 2 murders. And I just feel so bad that, you know, the families like of Nicole and Ron never really got their justice. I mean, I guess they did with the civil trial. He was found responsible in the civil suit for their deaths based on all the evidence when there's no jury. Or maybe it was a jury there.
But that's basically saying that he did it, right?
Yeah. So he was found guilty in a court of doing it, just not in the one that actually mattered. I mean, I guess the other one mattered too, but that was the one that was really going to get him in jail for ever. So, yeah.
Yeah, so it's crazy.
Really crazy.
Just to note that he was released in October 1st, 2017, and he was granted early release from his parole in December of 2021. So he basically can go anywhere he wants.
Well, he's like 70 now, isn't he? He's in his 70s. So,
He's 76.
yeah, geez. So he probably can't get into as much trouble now as he did before.
Yeah. And I wonder if he talks to his good old buddy Donald Trump, who he was friends with all those years ago.
Ugh.
Who knows? Just like, that's like the crowd of people he hangs around, just for context. Like, obviously, I mean, that was obviously before Trump was president and all that, but still. Criminals attract criminals, I guess.
Yeah.
Alleged criminals. Although, no, he's still a criminal because he still did that stuff in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
So
I just like Cato. Like he never really like. I mean, did he get much fame from being on trial with the O.J. Simpson case? I mean, I know he was on
he was on Celebrity Big Brother.
Yeah, Celebrity Big Brother.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah, a couple years ago.
And that's why he's famous, because of the trial?
Yeah. I mean, he never really did anything after. He's just like infamous. Like he, you know, people of that generation or who were alive at the time of the trial know him from that, but
Right, yeah.
he's never really done anything significant since then, I wouldn't say.
No,
Unless you count Celebrity Big Brother significant, but
but he didn't do very well in there, did he?
I don't.
no. He flopped. Yeah, so that's a whole other thing. Yeah, so I actually just have a couple of these questions that I wanted to ask at the end because I just like interesting to get your guys' opinion. So one of the questions that I have is like, do you guys think that the case was doomed from the minute it began? Like, in other words, do you think that there's anything that the prosecution could have done to win the case? Or was the jury always going to find OJ not guilty? Like, do you think that they lost it because of what happened in the trial? Or do you think that even if the trial went perfectly smoothly, they would have lost?
Well, I think there was a chance that maybe he could have been found guilty, but what gets it for me is that, like I mentioned before, that member of the Black Panthers that was in there that was kind of like all gung-ho about, you know, black rights and stuff. So I think it would have been very hard to sway him because he wasn't going to back down.
Yeah, I think there was some things that, well, I mean, a lot of things that didn't help the prosecution's case, but yeah, I don't think the jury was going to back down. I think they were committed to their verdict, and maybe going to his house for a field day, maybe that sealed the deal. I mean, it's kind of a stupid field trip anyways, because what's the point? But
Yeah, I find that very strange.
if you're going to do a field trip, go to like the crime scene or like a place where something happened, not somebody's house that he lived in for no reason.
I mean, I guess you can see where they found the glove on OJ's property, but that's it. Or any of that evidence from OJ's house, but
it was staged anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Like, it was just...
yeah. It was just crazy, that part. I don't know. But I also think, too, that, like, no matter what they did, like, I think the jury had it in their minds that they loved OJ or they wanted, you know, revenge for the Rodney King verdict or, you know, they just... So I really don't think it mattered what the prosecution did, unfortunately. Even though I think that they did a lot right, I just think, and, you know, mix that with OJ's really good defense team. I mean, even if you don't think... Obviously, I think they're liars and twisted the truth and whatever, but obviously they're really talented lawyers but I can't tell if it's like for a trial, like if someone's found not guilty, it's either like the prosecution really fucked up, the defense did really well, or the jury was like biased, or a combination.
I don't think I could ever be a defense lawyer, ever. I think that's just too much stress.
And like, I wonder, I know you said F. Lee Bailey, who wrote the book that Katie mentioned, like he really does think that OJ was innocent. And I'm just curious to see like what the other people on his defense team thought. Like, I'm pretty sure it came out that Robert Kardashian didn't believe that he was innocent towards the end. Like, he just didn't.
Yeah, when they show that, like, because they zoom in on like OJ basically when they read the verdict and Robert Kardashian's like in front of him, and you just see like the look of disbelief on his face when they say not guilty.
Yeah, so he really thought that he was going to be found guilty too, even though he was on his own defense. He was on OJ's defense team. So that's wild. So yeah, I just really think that in this case, I think it came down to the jury being biased against, or, you know, for OJ. They liked him or they wanted revenge or whatever. So I don't necessarily think it's what any of the prosecution or defense necessarily did wrong or right. It's more just the jury itself. And then another question I had is kind of like, how do you feel about high profile cases with celebrity defendants? Like, I always go to the most recent one I could think of is like the Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp one. That was like hugely publicized. It was kind of like, you know, the go-to news story for a while. So obviously, like, if you have any comparisons or differences between that case and OJ's, or like, what do you think of when there's a high profile celebrity on trial for something? There hasn't been obviously too many of them, but
I just think it's so hard for anyone involved to be objective at all, because as a jury or as the judge, you know these people, not personally, but you know what I mean? Like, you could be a huge fan of Johnny Depp, so it would be so hard to not be on his side. I don't know how they, like, find people that are truly going to be objective in these situations.
Yeah, Katie just literally took the words out of my mouth. I was just going to say, like, I don't know, how they pick these people then.
Yeah, like, before I didn't watch a ton of it, but I was, like, on Johnny Depp's side before I knew anything that was going on, right? Because I used to be such a huge fan of his growing up. So it was like, he didn't do anything wrong right from the get-go, right? So, if you found out that he did, then it's hard to switch from defending him, right? So, yeah.
He won that, though, didn't he?
I think. I didn't really follow it, but.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, he did.
I didn't really follow it a ton either.
I didn't watch it either. But it is really hard. It is really hard to find people who aren't biased, though, because especially, like, huge celebrities. Like, everybody, no matter where you go, you could take the case outside of the jurisdiction, but you're still going to find people who are obsessed with Johnny Depp or who are obsessed with Amber Heard or whoever the case may be. But I think it'd be super hard.
Yeah, so I think it's hard to find people that don't already have an opinion about it going in, whether they say they do or not.
But in that situation, though, like the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp thing, like, I don't know, maybe I haven't watched enough cases, but I feel like it's very unheard of for the man to win a domestic violence case. You know what I mean? I was actually shocked that he actually won. Not that we're going to go into his case, but I'm just...
Well, yeah, it's definitely... I don't know the numbers on that, but I would assume you're right. Like,
but it's all for money too, right? Because isn't Johnny Depp now dating his lawyer or whoever represented him?
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Oh my God. I mean, he's a whole other thing. I don't think he was innocent in the whole thing either, but...
Well, I'm not saying he was totally innocent either. Like, I'm sure he had his moments, but she's also a hot mess too, so...
Yeah. It's also very different because it wasn't like one of them killed the other one, right? It was just them fighting with each other and who deserved what and who did what, so...
The main source of, like, all the controversy and stuff was, like, when they would take the stand. Like, Amber and Johnny both took the stand, I believe. And so, like, that was a lot of it. Whereas in this case, OJ didn't even take the stand at all. He never testified, which is also a whole other thing, but...
Which is weird. You think he would, though.
I know. You'd think the defense would want him to because he was very, like, charismatic and charming. And you'd think that the defense would want to have him, like, put on a show for the jury, which I guess he did the whole time anyway. But maybe they thought he was more of a danger of, like, incriminating himself than anything else. But... I'm sure the prosecution would have wanted to cross-examine him.
Yeah, I think once he gets up there, then like when he gets cross-examined, they can really ask him a lot of things that probably the defense didn't want brought up, like his past with Nicole, how he treated her and stuff like that, and so he would have to answer those kind of questions. So it just wouldn't look good for him in that sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, the defense got the result they wanted in the end anyway, but. Yeah, so just a wild case, and, just so, it's almost 30 years ago, but it's still, like, so sad, like, Nicole would have been, I don't know her age, but, like, to think that, like, they both died so young, and Ron Goldman, I think he was 26, 27 at the time, and so he would have been, like, in his 50s now, and just sad, like, at the end of the day, it comes back to, like, the victims and their families of, like, they had to suffer through this, and, yeah, it was sensationalized with OJ and all of the media and stuff, but at the end of the day, like, regardless of who did it, like, two people were brutally murdered. And their killer was never brought to justice, whether it's OJ or someone else. So that ultimately is the worst part of it all. All right. So that does it for our first case of the new season. Thank you for listening to us talk about it for what's probably going on, 4 hours now between the 4 episodes or so. So thank you so much. We hope you've enjoyed it. And we want to hear, your feedback, what, your opinion is, whether you think OJ did it, which you probably do, or not, or, what pieces of evidence were most compelling for you, what stuck out in your mind, and what's kind of the thing that makes you believe beyond a doubt what your stance is. So we want to hear your feedback and what you think. And we're going to be back with another 4-part episode on another case. And we're excited to get that one started and talk about that one that's coming up. And yeah, as always, you can follow us on all the social medias, on Facebook, Crime Family Podcast, on Instagram, Crime Family Podcast, and on Twitter or X at Crime Family Pod 1. Check us out on Patreon. You can support the show with a small fee per month, and you'll get some extra episodes and some bonus content. We also have our merch store open on Redbubble. There's links. We're going to put links to all this in the show notes. We'll also put links to like videos and audio clips that we've talked about throughout these episodes as well. So you can feel free to kind of take a look at those, and they're definitely worth looking at, I would say, or listening to, depending if they're audio or video. But yeah, so definitely check us out, engage with us, send us messages, feedback, all that stuff. And our website is crimefamilypodcast.ca. So you can check that out as well. It's good to be back. Thank you for sticking with us for this 4-part series. We hope you maybe learned something or remembered something that you had forgot about this case, or maybe you think about it in a new way, or who knows. But at the very least, we hope, you enjoyed listening to our take on it, because we've enjoyed giving our take and hearing everyone's opinions, even though we didn't agree. All right. So yeah, that does it for this episode. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Till then, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.